On the last Draftables episode, we analyzed Rainbow Mons, who use an abundance of coverage moves to threaten some surprise 2-shots and even the elusive 1-hit KO. Before that, I talked about Galarian Zapdos and Mons who have very strong stab options that create offensive pressure on whatever might switch in. Well, capping off a trio of offensively oriented VGC Draft League analysis, we have the strongest, the most extreme Mons out there. The Mons who might have a more limited skill set, but when they use it well, create unstoppable offense that decides games before they're even over. This week is the Nuke, and the showcase Mon will be Xurkitree. I'm excited to talk about Xurkitree. I'm going to be doing a deep dive into what it's got and how to build your whole team in ways that maximize its strengths, mitigates its weaknesses, and produces wins, and wins hard. I'll be providing some tools of analysis that might be useful for analyzing other nukes like Xurkitree, and if you're fighting against a nuke, I'll give you some tools on how to beat them. If you like this kind of analytical content, please leave a like below. Excited to get into this one, let's do it. So, summarizing Xurkitree is not terribly hard. It has 173 special attack, and that is the highest special attack stat ever. That's including restricted Mons, who aren't even legal in most draft leagues. If you take away the restricted Mons, it's not even close, actually. Xurkitree is like 15% stronger than everything else. And it has internal scaling. The ability, once it gets a KO, gets 50% more offense, and that's when it becomes truly a wrecking ball. I define a nuke as a Mon that routinely threatens OHKOs on Mons that aren't weak to it. And that's how you get there, right? You start with the highest attack, and then you pile on multipliers on top of that, and Xurkitree becomes truly unstoppable. So the Pokemon Company knew they were making an extreme Mon here. They attempted to balance it by giving it a somewhat limited move pool. We have all the usual electric moves, but besides that, we have exactly 2 coverage types. We have 1 or 2 useful grass moves, and then just a Dazzling Gleam. That's all we have to work with off of our insane 173 attack stat. We do have a couple of like electric mischief-y moves. We have a couple of defensive tools if you might get a chance to use them, but mainly this is electric. This is electric power at its peak. So just looking at electric, it's actually a pretty good offensive type, right? It's not resisted by too much. Obviously, we have to worry about ground moves who we can't hit at all, but Xurkitree does have that one built-in coverage move for handling ground types, that Energy Ball or Grass Knot or something. So we need to be able to beat these 4 types. And if we look at Mons that resist all 3 of Xurkitree's moves, they're a small group of very annoying Mons for Xurkitree. They're mostly plants, a couple of steel types, and so we want to be able to counter Xurk's counters, right? Knowing that Xurkitree counters everything that doesn't counter it, right? Neutral matchups are just fodder for Xurkitree to get the Beast Boost going. So looking at all these Mons, they're mostly all weak to fire. So everything that beats Xurkitree should be beaten by an Arcanine. An Arcanine can flamethrower that Venusaur, or the Magnezone, or the Ferrothorn, and it also has general defensive tools, right? We have enough power by itself just with the Xurkitree, so we want defensive tools. Intimidate, Snarl, Will-O-Wisp, slow the game down so Xurkitree can speed the game up in your favor. And some fire types even have tools for dealing with that ground type, like a Power Herb Solar Beam, some have Leaf Blade. So a lot of fire types should be able to provide some offensive synergy with Xurkitree. The 2 Mons that aren't weak to fire but also resist all of Xurk, they're just other electric types, and so we might want our ground type to be able to deal with them. Ground types have a good synergy with Xurkitree because they resist the discharge. They beat the other electric types that are trying to resist the Xurk, but they also allow you to use their electric move that hits everybody, but your own ground type will be immune to them, so you can, once you're unstoppable, you want to be able to hit 2 Mons at a time. So that can be really good. Ground types also often include like strong physical attack, which is good to complement with Xurk's strong special attack. A lot of them have a fire punch, so that's good offensive synergy. And then they have the rock move for hitting like Rotom Heat or other things that might resist Xurkitree. So this is a good team of complementary players to Xurkitree. I looked into Nidoqueen, who I think is a good like bulky counterpart. It's a little better at sticking around. It has all that coverage to deal with Xurkitree's counters. And the one tricky part here is everything I've talked about to pair with Xurkitree offensively is also defensively still weak to ground moves. So the fire types, where's my fire types? Fire types. Fire types and Nidoqueen all weak to ground moves, so we're starting to find an issue here. We're gonna need some floating Pokemon. We're gonna need mons that are at least resisting ground, if not immune to it. So here's an example. Talking about offensive synergy, the best coverage combination out there, or one of the best, is Bolt Beam. Electric plus Ice. Looking at the few types that resist electric, Grass, Dragon, Ground, all weak to Ice, and at least Electric does not resist Ice. So if you've got Bolt Beam, you don't need Electric and Ice on the same mon. If you got it covered across your squad, you're good. And so Cryogonal can threaten some Ice-type coverage on Xurkitree's problems. It can give speed control for Xurkitree. It can provide screens, more defensive utility to keep Xurkitree around. That seems like a pretty good combo, and particularly that Levitate, being able to be immune to ground moves. But we got to start building around Xurkitree defensively. These are some tools that should apply to any nuke that has already solved the offensive side of the equation. Every offensive mon just needs a little bit of time, right, to do its damage, and so Fake Out gives you a free turn most of the time. Intimidate gives you additional turns because things that might knock you out are no longer, and so mons like Incineroar, Hitmontop, Scrafty, really good for slowing down the game, giving you that defensive backbone so that your offense can take off. Fast screens, very good damage mitigation. The fastest screens out there are priority screens, Prankster, but also the fast natural screen setters can really provide some defensive synergy for Xurkitree. Building on that, another way to help Xurkitree get that snowball going is to just bring other threats that distract the opponent. You're gonna need to bring your ground type against the Xurkitree. You're gonna need to bring your grass type. But does that same mon have tools to beat a Garchomp, for example? A Incin Garchomp lead keeps their damage in check, deals with some threats to Xurkitree, and then by the time Xurkitree comes in, then it's unresisted. That could be one game plan. Do you have the tools to beat the Bronzong, but if you, in the process of beating the Bronzong, lose your ground type, or lose your fire type, or lose your grass type, then Xurkitree comes in as number 3 here. So I don't think it's a mon that is best in the lead. I mean, it certainly can be in the lead, but it's also not best at the end of the game because you need to try to get a snowball going with Xurkitree using Beast Boost. So it's a good mon to come in number 3 while the situation is still fluid. You still have a partner by your side to try to take some of the heat off of Xurkitree. That's one way you can get the wins going. Another way is just offensive overload. In some ways, the best defense is overwhelming offense. And so Coco's not only providing screens for Xurkitree, but it's providing the electric terrain, a 30% boost to its main attacks, and that's the best way to get that one-hit KO. Xurk might be threatening a KO on 40% of mons that don't resist it from the get-go, which is already very impressive, but after that one beast boost, then we're mostly KOing everything. So getting that snowball going, very important. Rotoms are really good Pokemon in general. I recommend them, but they create an offensive overload because they're just more electric power, targeting the few mons that can resist electric because they have the tools to beat the ground types, to beat the things that would normally beat them. Water, grass, ice, the 3 weaknesses of ground types right here in Rotom form. They also have defensive tools of their own, Will-O-Wisp, Eerie Impulse, so that's just overall, I think, a really good combination with Xurkitree. Defense, offensive overload, and beating, countering the counter of the counter. And so finally, we have a lot of special power, but if that's all we're threatening, then the opponent will pile on snarls, light screens, etc. So we want our own physical power. These are some physical nukes. I get into some specific calcs and showing the very strongest nukes out there, but if you just grab 2 different nukes, how do you beat them at the same time? It gets harder and harder. So finally, we can start talking about Xurkitree specifically. It is a nuke. It is a somewhat bulky nuke. What's kind of surprising here is that Xurkitree is far and away the strongest Pokemon, at least in terms of raw numbers, but it's also not as frail as some of these other mods. Typically, there's a big trade-off here. So this is a glass cannon, definitely cannon, but definitely can be taken out in one hit. Chandler can definitely be taken out in one hit with its low HP stat. Cursula, very weak on the defense stat. You'll see in general that the mons with cannon are generally glass, and so it's just surprising that Xurkitree has nearly average defensive stats. And it has above average speed. So it seems like a mon that just has like really, really great numbers. This is a very useful speed stat in my opinion. 60 and 70 can be very hard to work with, where you're not even in range with a Scarf or with an Icy Wind to outspeed the things you need. But Xurkitree just barely gets there, right? So it can outspeed base 70s while still boosting its attack, so it does not need to invest its nature into boosting its speed. When it invested speed, of course, it's edging out those base 80s by a couple of points, and that's a very crowded speed tier. And then with the Scarf, 83 is just enough for us to get past the Spectriers and the Crobats while still running Modest. And then with Scarf, we're outspeeding the Broken Sword Dog. So, like, there's very few mons that can get past a Scarf Xurkitree on turn 1. They need Prankster, or they need to be Regieleki or Pheromosa. Basically, that's it. So, a very useful speed stat, like pretty usable defenses. I'm like pretty impressed with this thing, and I'm surprised that it has not gotten the top tier attention. Like, I'm not going to do a Draftables episode on Regieleki, because everyone knows, if they've ever been on ladder, they know how to beat the Regieleki, they know how to use the Regieleki. But Xurkitree, I think, has a lot of potential in Draft League, not because it has amazing tools. Like, usually I'm talking about Draft League mons or mons that have 17 different moves. It's because with Draft League, you get to find a lot of different ways to build around Xurkitree, to mitigate its weaknesses, and to make it that win con that affects every single team in team buildings. Like, how do I beat that Xurkitree? How do I stop that Xurkitree? So looking at some of its sets, I think Life Orb is always going to be solid right here. Adding another 30% on a big number can't hurt. But if you don't need the Life Orb, if you're going to have to run calcs each week, if you don't need Life Orb to start scoring those OCOs and get the Beast Boost going, I think one of the default items should be Shukaberry. Right? You've already got the offensive side of the equation covered, so just try to deal with the defense. This might allow Xurkitree to just stand on its own without like a dedicated support mon by its side. That can be good. Scarf really, really helps with Xurkitree because it edges out so many mons that would try to outspeed it and take it out. Electro Web. This can be a Scarf Electro Web, and normally you don't want to use your strongest offensive mon to do support stuff, but this is a combination of damage and support. It's still strong stab damage, and it's allowing like double ups Xurkitree into something else to take out mons, and then Xurkitree doesn't have to defend itself if the thing in front of it is already knocked out. Scarf can allow it to Eerie Impulse something and actually play defensively. Not saying this is the best way to use Xurkitree, but if you're going to Eerie Impulse, then you're going to want to Eerie Impulse first. An Assault Vest can help. Xurkitree doesn't have a lot of useful attacking moves. It's mostly, it is exactly electric moves, grass, and Dazzling Gleam. So this is just for its defensive utility. It can allow you to run different electric moves for different circumstances that discharge to hit both enemies, Volt Switch if you want to get out of there. Maybe defensive Xurkitree. Like, I think Rillaboom could be good, not just because of Grassy Seed, but because it weakens Earthquakes, but because it beats the ground types for Xurkitree. Potentially substitute, maybe endgame Xurkitree. I think might be tough, but if Xurkitree can't be knocked out, then you've already won the game. Like, even if it should be able to win the game quickly, and so maybe not a defensive Xurkitree, but you want to experiment. It can't be a glass cannon all the time. It needs to be able to live a hit, because that'll make the difference. One turn, Xurkitree can do a lot with just one turn. So is this the strongest attacks out there coming from Xurkitree? Well, not quite. There are nukier nukes out there. The best mons don't have just raw numbers, but they have raw numbers and multipliers. And so if we stick to just the one broken move that the Gen 8 fossils got, these are the strongest possible unassisted moves out there, where Choice Band plus Hustle plus the moves that get twice as strong if you're going first. Just this move allows you to OHKO 80% of Mons. Like 80% of fully evolved Mons are not as bulky as Regigigas. And so we're OHKOing just about everything with the strongest moves out there. So these are the very, very limited nukes, but in exchange they get to potentially OHKO Mons that resist them. Like Dracovish can actually OHKO a Whimsicott. Like a resisted Whimsicott is actually pretty absurd. This is the strongest Mon that isn't just using one move to reach those heights, because it has an innate 50% boost using its ability. Galarian Darmanitan's an absolute wrecking ball, but I don't think it has even the defensive properties that Xurkitree has. It certainly has more weaknesses. Below that, adaptability is what makes the Porygon Z one of the strongest Mons out there. I'm not including like Hyper Beam in these rankings here. Like you definitely need to be able to attack every turn. But like Urshifu, definitely one of the strongest nukes. Kartana has the very strongest single stat at 181 physical attack. And then we get to Xurkitree with the 173. But so Xurkitree being number 7, as far as I can see, there might be 1 or 2 exceptions to this, other adaptability Mons or something. Well, actually, only adaptability Porygon Z just barely edges out Xurkitree, so maybe not. But Xurkitree, definitely one of the strongest attacks possible, just on your own. But Xurkitree has, like other Mons can get to the height of Xurkitree if they just use Thunder rather than Thunderbolt, if they use Zap Cannon rather than Thunder, if they're willing to use a move that might miss. But what Xurkitree has access to that no other Mon does is when it goes for the risky move, when it tries to squeeze out a little bit more power. If you're willing to go for Zap Cannon, then you are able to reach those heights of OHKOing one of the bulkiest Mons out there that isn't even weak to electric moves, that has bulk added to it. It becomes truly able to OHKO base just about anything. But it's just about how much risk are you willing to handle here. Xurkitree is not going to be around that long, so are you willing to risk a miss here? One way Xurkitree can take advantage of risk is stuff like this. Like I don't really love sets like this, but what can be cool is Zap Cannon hits half the time and it paralyzes them, so therefore cutting their speed relative to Xurkitree. But it only hits half the time, and so if you miss, Blunder Policy will double your speed. So in either case, whether you hit or whether you miss, Xurkitree is getting double speed relative to its opponent, and so then you can go for the Hypnosis, you can go for your second shot at Zap Cannon, you can go for solid, reliable damage with Dazzling Gleam. So knowing that you have contingency, you can take on more risk, and then contingency for if the risk doesn't pan out, it can be pretty good. And this solves the Xurkitree the speed problem, right? It's got the offense, and then with Blunder Policy gets as much speed as it knows what to do with. So that could be pretty good. You need to at least threaten this, right? Widen your threat bubble, because Xurkitree is not giving you a wide threat bubble with lots of different coverage moves, with lots of different support moves. It's electric moves, and so you need to at least threaten that some of the time it's not going to be Thunderbolt. Sometimes it's going to be Zap Cannon. Sometimes it's going to be Electro Webs. Sometimes it's going to be Hypnosis, just for fun. For fun for you, not for them. So we're finally getting to beating Xurkitree. Like, we've already addressed beating Xurkitree when we're building with Xurkitree, because we need to be able to beat the ground types. Definitely, if you have moves that are, if you have Mons that are immune to electric types, then you've taken away half of Xurkitree's potential threat, over half, I would say. Strong neutral hits, right? With a light screen, Xurkitree's going to live 1 close combat, 1 Draco Media, maybe with defensive investment it can live 1 by itself, but certainly not 2, right? So you just want to throw out Mons that are faster than 83, that are faster with strong neutral moves. Electric doesn't have a lot of weaknesses, only 1, but it doesn't have that many resistances, so you want to throw out your strong neutral moves. If you can find a way to resist the Xurk, 1 turn might be all you need to slow Xurkitree down. I don't think you can just throw a light screen up and expect to stop the snowball. I think you need dedicated special attack drops onto Xurkitree using Eerie Impulse or Snarl Spam, or a Mon that can definitely tank these hits. Like a Mon like Regice has huge special defense, so it can kind of sit there long enough. Wide Guard can be pretty good because Xurkitree's moves, like, yeah, it has Thunderbolt, but like some of its electric moves are spread moves, and its only fairy move is Dazzling Gleam. So a dragon with access to a partner with Wide Guard means it's resisting all of Xurkitree's other attacks that are just electric and grass, and you know it can't hit you with D-Gleam while you're Wide Guarding, so it can be good that way. So Xurkitree's not terribly fast, but games involving Xurkitree should go pretty fast, right? If Xurkitree gets a Beast Boost and Speed Control without dying, then it's probably game over. And so conversely, if you can deal with the Xurkitree before it's done anything, if the opponent has gone too hard into their game plan of just trying to support Xurk, that's why I recommend you shouldn't have like Xurkitree plus 3 supports. As good as that sounds, Xurkitree might go down and then you're going to be stuck. So you need another physical attacker, another really strong physical attacker, a bulkier attacker, but sometimes you're going to really go all in on Xurkitree, and so it might cost you the game if it goes down too quickly. Dynamax is not a fit for Xurkitree, and so this is the time. As we head towards more 9 Dynamax draft leagues, a lot of Mons can't just Dynamax to live a Xurkitree hit now. They can't use Max Quake, which is the perfect counter to Xurkitree, not only hitting it super effectively, but also getting special defense boosts that allow them to survive Xurkitree's hits a lot better. Other Mons just have random Max Airstreams or random Steel Spikes, and Xurkitree doesn't really have that going for it. So as nice as it was to like just provide another multiplier on Xurkitree in the form of Dynamax and potentially let it survive to use Beast Boost stronger, I don't think Dynamax was Xurkitree's time. I think its time is now. In 9 Dynamax draft leagues, just keep Xurkitree around with the defensive backbone tools we talked about earlier. Fake out to give Xurkitree a turn or two of leeway. Here is where I talk about the other tools. Just pile on lots of different tools. It doesn't mean bring Xurkitree every week, but you should have an abundance of tools to keep Glass Cannons alive, because one week they're going to bring the fastest fake out, right? Because they want to beat your fake out and they want to handle the Xurkitree. Well, you just protect that week, or you just provide prankster screens and you don't bring Xurkitree in the lead and you try to control their control. Redirection, going to be very, very good because you're like, I've got my Earth Power, I'm set. But then if that Gastrodon can't take care of the Clefairy, then Xurkitree is going to Energy Ball that Gastrodon. Just thinking about specific matchups, though, Draft League is just the combination of a lot of different matchups. In general, you will get a feel for the kinds of roles Mons fill, and I think that's what the Draftables is for here, is knowing that these are your general tools that are found on more than just one Mon for supporting a nuke like Xurkitree. You're going to want offensive synergy, right? Beat the Mons that try to resist the Xurkitree, and then knowing that Xurkitree simplifies games, right? It doesn't have a lot of tools itself, but the tools to beat it are relatively straightforward, usually ground types, and so floating Pokemon really expand your threat, right? Because you might switch in that Mesprit or Uxie that will be totally immune to the ground type move, and that gives you some mix-up potential. These are the nukes. These are the Mons with the highest stats out there, but also in particular the Mons with multipliers. Rage Drago gets 50% boost on top of it. Its dragon moves. Dragovich double fishes Rens. And then in particular all these Mons with beast boost. All of the Mons that have automatic scaling. When they get a KO, they get even stronger. That one too. And so these are the strongest Mons out there. Ultimately, you're going to have to dig into these Mons. You're going to have to go into Team Builder and just think about sort on the highest stats, sort on the adaptability, the guts Mons, the Mons with multipliers, and say, how do I make the most of this Mon? It's got offense, but how do I beat the Mons that beat it? Like Dracovish, for example, right? It's absurdly strong, and so some things that think they're defensive switch into Dracovish aren't, right? Like a resisted Venusaur just dies. I think that's pretty hilarious. But you're going to have to beat the Storm Drain Mons that would come to redirect Dracovish, right? You're going to need a like a grass type to beat the Gastrodon. You're going to need like a fairy to beat the dragons that would try to resist Dracovish and take it out. You're going to need different forms of speed control, so Iron Ball Dracovish, right, plus a Trick Room mode for teams that are just trying to go really, really fast to handle the Dracovish. So go one step farther with your theorizing here. How do I beat the mons that beat that? How do I beat the mons that beat that? Like, that's, I think, the way to come up with a great draft is to think about your matchups, try to group your matchups, try to group your problem matchups, and try to handle that with the rest of your draft. So my final verdict is that Xurkitree is a high tier. I mean, it has to be, right? It's one of the strongest Pokemon ever. I do think it requires more support from the rest of your draft than most other mods. And so therefore, don't grab it in your first few rounds. Maybe start off with a bulky attacker that you can bring week in, week out, like a Tapu Fini or something. Maybe start out with a top tier support like a Whimsicott. Then you solve Xurkitree's questions about speed. You can help keep Xurkitree alive with priority charm, priority light screen. You can get its snowball going with a Prankster Fake Tears. Start with the mons you can bring week in, week out, because Xurkitree shouldn't show up every week. Experiment with leaving Xurkitree at home one of the first few weeks, because it's the weeks when opponents leave their foot off the gas, is they don't prepare fully for the Xurkitree, and they get overrun, and Xurkitree gets 6 KOs. So it's not an every week type mon, right? It's not the mon that can beat every ground type out there. It's not the mon that's going to beat the lightning rodders, but sometimes it is really, really valuable. Go all in on mons like Xurkitree because their upside is just decimation, win after win after win in the right circumstance. In dramatic fashion. You want to win in dramatic fashion with mons like Xurkitree. Let's pull up that Eruption game. That Eruption game is pretty nuts. Just one moment. Yeah, you've maybe seen this game before, but it's worth watching again. This is what you can do with enough power, then type matchups don't even matter anymore. Once you get snowballing strong enough, this was a really good switch in by OMG It's Daddy to give a Flash Fire boost onto Typhlosion. Sunny Day is another multiplier, and Eruption, goodbye everything. I don't care if you resist Eruption, I don't care if you're one of the bulkiest Pokemon ever. At this point, the game is decided. I think this was a choice Specs Eruption. But if you weren't Specs, I mean, at this point with the 2 multipliers, you probably has the OHKO in either case, even without Specs. In this case, the opponent has no choice but to target Typhlosion. If they got a chance to attack, I'm sure both attacks were going into Typhlosion. In that case, you get to protect your Typhlosion, or your Xurkitree, or your Spectrier, or whatever. I love that kind of pressure that nukes create, that the amount that you can get inside your opponent's head, you can create that panic, force them to do certain things that you can then take advantage of. If Daddy was just protecting the Typhlosion and set up a light screen or set up a taunt or something, or swapped in his fake out, then the next turn is free. That's the kind of mind games that simplify your game plan and make the game plan a lot harder for the opponent. That's the nuke, everybody. Let me know what you want to hear about next in the next Draftables analysis. I've got a kind of far-reaching one where I'm going to analyze like a number of different mons next week. Hopefully I'll try to keep that concise and interesting for y'all. Stay tuned.